Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to be here this evening with you. Thank you to our friends here at Venture Cafe. Kelly and I couldn't be more thrilled to spend this time with you. And before we get started, we thought we would just sort of share with you a little bit about how we're hoping to spend our time together. Jen, as you know, just shared with you some of the housekeeping. We'd love you to ask any and all questions. Everything's open, so please, we're going to create sacred space together. So all questions are welcome. We are going to ground ourselves in creating that safe space as we go into sort of, what Kelly and I tend to call, sometimes they can be messy conversations, but hopefully we can do them with love. Kelly's going to set some ground rules and some principles of how we'll spend our time. We'll talk a little bit about how Kelly and I actually were brought together by the book White Fragility in more ways than one. And then we're going to jump into some questions regarding the book. And we'd love to get your thoughts, engage in a fruitful conversation amongst all of us as sisters and brothers and family members this evening. And then we're going to open it up for a free-for-all Q&A. And then before we all leave, we're going to ask for two things. We're going to ask that we close our space in a grounding way. And we're going to ask for a screenshot. But we'll remind everyone of those things when we get there. So for now, what we'd love to ask everyone to do is that if it's comfortable for you, we'd love to invite you to sort of close your eyes, and we'll set an intention for our time together this evening. Together, we will create brave space because there's no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we all have caused wounds.
In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know.
We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be.
But it will be our brave space together.
And we will work on it side by side. Thank you so much, everyone. So
thanks for joining us. I'll just go over just some of our principles. You'll see them here. We just want to point out to use responsible discretion. You're more than welcome to speak about your experience, about everything that's said on your own learnings and your own reflections outside of here. But we just ask that you respect and keep everybody else's in the sacred space. Meet judgment with curiosity. Sometimes when we hear terms, as white people, when we hear terms like racist or white supremacy, things kind of can be inflammatory. And so you just want to ask yourself, where is that judgment coming from? And just be open and curious to wonder and just say to yourself, that's interesting. Accept and expect non-closure. This book was just a first step for me. So there's just nothing that we're going to solve today or tonight, and to be okay with that. Make space and take space. If you're used to making space and letting others speak, maybe it's your time to take up some space. And if you're used to taking up space, maybe that's the time to kind of hang back for a half a second and hear somebody else's viewpoint that maybe wouldn't be heard. And our last one is, we don't defend white fragility. Each person's experience is their own to work through, and we don't need to save them. They can be with themselves, they can leave, they can come back. It's completely up to them. All good?
Any questions? All righty then. So as Jen pointed out, my name is Aurora Archer. I am the Blacktina portion of the opt-in. I was born in San Antonio, Texas, to an immigrant Mexican mother and an African American father, and I come from extremely humble beginnings. Both of my parents were domestics. I grew up cleaning houses in very wealthy San Antonio suburbs. And through the grace of grit, God, and tenacity, I made it to the upper echelons of corporate America until most recently, a couple of years ago, when I decided to become an entrepreneur in the health and wellness space with my own marketing consulting firm with my co-founder, Pamela. And in addition, started the Opt-in with Kelly.
Hi all, I'm Kelly Croce Sorg. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia, uber privileged. I always knew I was fortunate, but it wasn't actually until I read White Fragility that I realized, wow, I would never be, and my father would never have been where he was if he were Black. I shouldn't say never, but I should say the odds are stacked against that he would ever have that opportunity that he had. And you know, I was in entrepreneurial businesses. I was able to raise my kids at home, and I was privileged enough to raise my kids at home and work in family businesses and kind of work on my own time and my own hours. And through our conversations, Aurora and my conversations, it just opened up a whole new world. So I look forward to talking more about that with you tonight.
And so, how did this all start? In 2016 was a watershed moment for so many of us. As a woman of color, I was actually quite struck at how surprised my white girlfriends were about the outcome of the election. I think as people of color, um, I was very clear that there was very much a possibility that it would end or the results would be what they were. And also, along the same time frame where I was watching this dissonance between what I knew I was experiencing versus my white girlfriends, a fabulous book was written, which is the one we've all chosen to read, White Fragility. When I read White Fragility, I cried turning every page. And I cried because, and I still get emotional about it. It was actually the first time that a white person, a white female, a white recognized academic put into words in a very clear and succinct way everything I had been feeling, everything that I had experienced in my life up until that point. And it literally brought me to my knees. And it validated it validated so much in a world where for so long I felt I had been gaslit and told that what I was experiencing or what I was feeling was not actually real. And so I proceeded to buy 25 copies of the book. I bought 25 copies of the book and handed it out to all of my beautiful, lovely white friends and former work colleagues. And when I shared the book with each of them, I said, I'm gifting you this book, and I'm inviting you to the opportunity to open your aperture. And that invitation comes from the deepest place of grace and love that I have for you, and the request for you to do better. To be very honest, there's some people that I gave that book to I have not heard from. But others, like Kelly, took a very different turn and approach.
I was just thinking yesterday, I cannot remember receiving the book, and there's something there. There's some form of denial that I have there. I just remember coming to in the process of reading the book and feeling like I was getting my clothes taken off in front of like a large group of people, and like picture like Queen Cersei, if you've seen like Game of Thrones, where she's walking through the city and naked and throwing tomatoes at her. That's what I was like feeling, just like shame and horror, because my coming to was, oh my gosh, Aurora gave me this book, and I'm thinking she's giving me this book because I'm like a good white person. And she was giving me this book because I am this white person, and my family's this white people, and my friends are these white people. And this whole time I'm thinking about that we're talking about these white people over there, and it's like, this is me. And it was like a deeply triggering and shifting, and there was a lot of shame and guilt and fear and all kinds of negative emotions tied up in it, but it kept on bringing me back to my matrix had shifted, and I was looking through at a world that I wasn't looking, I couldn't look back the way I was looking at it before, that it had permanently changed. And one of the biggest moments for me of white fragility is when I realized that 1776 wasn't what I thought it was. And so I was like, wow, I thought like Philadelphia, like home of the free and land of the brave and blah, blah, blah. And, we would whistle, Yankee Doodle Dandy and like the 4th of July parade every year. And like, if the history that I should have learned, we learned, then everything from the start of the country, or actually before the start of the country, was racist, and everything that was made in that country was racist, and every rule that was made in that country was our country was racist. Everything that was produced, there was nothing that wasn't racist. So there was no argument anymore of like, he's a racist or she's a racist or I'm not racist. Like it's impossible. That's impossible. Everything's racist. And so I'm like, the American flag doesn't even stand for what I thought it did. And I felt so foolish and so ignorant and vapid. And I was just like, oh man. I even turned to Aurora, I was like, so you guys don't like celebrate 4th of July, do you? And she was just like, no. And I was like, oh my God. And that was just the beginning. So when we started talking, she was kind of like, I was like, don't talk. This is my work to do. I am sorry. I love you. I will do better. But this is my work to do. But then she would kind of be like, well, what are you working on? And what are you reading? And what are you doing? And so I would say, oh, I was like just going down the rabbit hole on this or that. And we would start talking about things, or I'd ask her about things, and we would just get into deeper and deeper conversations, where before we would talk about race, but now it was with a different lens. And we just wondered, are other people having these conversations? Because I was kind of feeling like my white girlfriends were not having these conversations. And Aurora assumed every white girlfriend had a girlfriend of color. And I was like, I don't think that's true. And so we thought, well, maybe everybody needs to hear what a woman of color and a white woman have to learn about each other and for each other.
And hence the
so that's the opt-in
was born. And the whole premise is opting in, because I think every single day we have to opt in to do better. We have to opt in to stay curious. We have to opt in to bring our open hearts. And we have to opt in to examine ourselves. And we have to opt into the choice of healing. So, with that, we'd love to begin our conversation about the book. And so we shared with you how Kelly and I, what was the experience we had with the book and what transpired post reading the book. And we'd love to hear from you. What was your experience? What did it offer you? Or does it continue to offer you, and why?
And even if you didn't read it, or you only read portions of it, there's all things to experience in that as well. So yeah, you can launch the poll, Jen, if you want. Sorry. I think you might have messaged that earlier and I missed it. So we're putting up a quick poll just so we know how many people read it, read part of it, didn't read it. No shame, no judgment.
No shame.
No judges. Just so we know kind of where we're coming from. And we know you're going to read it after this. I mean, it's just compelling. I'll just give a little share while everybody's filling out the poll. So I reread it, actually read it 3 times, like recently. But the second time I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, I don't know, 250 pages and like 12 chapters. It's not that long. And I'm thinking to myself, I perceived this book the first time I read it 2 years ago to be like War and Peace. Like I felt like it was this thick, this heavy, took me weeks to read, as opposed to the last time took me 3 days. So it just goes to show, like, when I realized the weight of it when I was reading it, it was like the magnitude of everything that was said in it, and the weight of each sentence, and the impact that my unconsciousness had with each of those sentences felt really, really heavy the first time. So I understand some of you didn't pick up the book yet, and I get it. But definitely do yourself a favor and read this book. So we have about half did not read, little less than half read, and then so half have read or a portion of the book, and half have not read the book. So share with us, what was your experience? Pop it in the group chat. Skinny little book, but it's scary with that big black and white cover. Like, oh my gosh. You know how many people I know have that book?
Hi,
Tracy!
guys. So I know I'm one of these people who talks, so I was really trying not to talk. So, but I will start out just to get the conversation started. Then I promise I'll keep quiet. The book was really difficult for me. In particular, the beginning part of the book was very difficult for me. And so it was multiple times of starting it and reading the first 60 pages. Because I never thought of myself as a racist. Like, I was like, wait, what? So to your point about that was other people. And so it took me a very, very long time to be able, and several readings, to be able to get past the first 60 pages. But each time I read it, I see and learn more from it. So it's like, this time it's dog-eared and, kind of underlined. And I just thought so many things were fascinating and true.
Yeah, can I also ask you a question, Trace? I realized the second time I read it, I had highlighted almost the whole damn book. And then the second time I read it, the parts that I didn't highlight, I would have highlighted. So I think I didn't even understand them the first time around. And then the second time around, I was like, oh, I get that now. Did you have any of that or no?
I definitely did. And it was interesting. I felt, for whatever reason, it was in the latter part of the book where I felt like I'd connected with Robin. And even though when I'd read the book the first time and heard her on the Opt-in podcast, which is, by the way, my favorite podcast, you all know that, I still, it was like the stories in the latter half of the book the second time around that started to, I don't know, maybe I was more open. Maybe I was, listening more despite the fact that I was reading, or I was seeing more examples of myself in it. And so, whereas the first time around, I think it was like, okay, I have to read this. Mm-hmm. To do what I'm doing and to be a better person, I need to read this. But I think the second time around, I almost read it more for me and was really unpacking a lot of what it was saying.
Kelly, I like what you say here. Kelly Beck, she says it was fascinating, and I found myself nodding along as I read it, thinking, I do that.
Yes.
Can you say more about that?
I found it to be a really eye-opening book that I then proceeded, like every person I interacted with, I'm like, I have to tell you about this book. I have to tell you what I've read. Like, it was just, to me, I was like, oh my God, I do that. Oh my God, I see that. And just, the whole premise around you're raised in this society. Because I read it going, yeah, I'm a person. I don't think I'm racist. And then I'm reading going, oh, like just it was for me very revolutionary from that perspective. And I, immediately once I finished the book, like I couldn't put it down. And when I had to, I couldn't wait to get back to it, to read more and learn more. And then I posted on my Facebook page and I was like, you have to read this book. And I'm like, and if you've read this book, I want to have a discussion about it, and started to get all these comments. And so within my sorority, we put together a group of us from across the country are going to come together in a couple of weeks and read it and talk about it as well, which for me is exciting because I think it's a book to be shared.
Wow, that's fantastic, Kelly. Thank you for sharing. So may I ask another question of both yourself and Tracy? Because I think you touched on this, Kelly, back that once you read it, it's almost like you start seeing things in a way that you hadn't seen them before. Did that happen to either of you? Where you're able to recognize yourself, right? The things in yourself. But did you start sort of looking around and going, oh shit, there it is?
They always say in there's like series of being able to change your behavior, and part of it is recognizing that you're doing it and acknowledging it. And so I think the good part is that I've had opportunities where I've stopped myself, so it hasn't changed. Unfortunately, I'm still thinking it, or wanting to do a certain behavior, and then but it's caused me pause, which I guess is better than having done the behavior completely oblivious to the fact that I was thinking that I was going to say something or do something and then not. Fortunately, I didn't follow through, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about, I've seen it in others, and I've heard it or seen it in myself going, oh, okay. Like, as to Tracy's point, like thinking about something or listening to someone make a statement, or I'll see something on TV and someone makes a statement. I'm like, huh, yeah, there it is. Like it is everywhere.
I wonder what music they like.
Sorry, go ahead. So I was gonna say it's made me more aware of and listening, I don't want to say listening for it, because it's not like I'm intentionally doing that, but I pick up on it a lot more frequently.
Thank you. And I think the beauty is in that pause, because I think in that pause is the opportunity to heighten awareness and also to heighten consciousness. And as you pointed out, Tracy, the opportunity in that pause to, and even however short it is to decide the next course of action and be conscious of the impact, right? And I wanted to, I felt like there was someone else who may have wanted to chime in. Any additional
Nicole,
thoughts?
thank you for putting in the chat. I don't know if it's okay. I just wanted to read Nicole's mentioning. I found the book incredibly validating of my experiences as a Black woman, especially in corporate America and academia.
Yeah, so if I was trying to figure out how this works, so I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I didn't get a chance to read the book, but I did watch some of her interviews, including the interview she did with you both, which I thought was fantastic.
Thank you.
And yes, it's interesting because I am an entrepreneur now, but a lot of my decisions to become an entrepreneur had to do with the harm, emotional and mental harm that I experienced in academia and corporate America. And it's interesting because it felt very individual. It felt I'm always being told that I'm crazy. I'm always overreacting. It makes me emotional talking about it. That's why I had to kind of pause before I could respond. And the more and more I'm talking to other like Black women, they're having a very similar experience. And to an extent that I got sick, like physically sick. So it's not just like, oh, my feelings are hurt. You know, it's like, you know, physically my body is breaking down because of these experiences that I'm having in academia and corporate. So I really appreciated Robin, that's her first name.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The book, I really appreciate her honesty in terms of recognizing her privilege about having this conversation, that what she is saying is really just amplifying the voices of brown and Black folks, but recognizing too that because we live in a system that does privilege some voices over others, I do think it is white allies who are going to help us advance this message and really get it to the gatekeepers and the decision makers and the people who are really in positions to make decisions that will really impact the lives of the rest of us.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you.
And I echo, you know, for me, you know, reading the book, again, it was just so validating. And I read the book and turned every page crying, because there is something that, you know, when you are told you're crazy. I mean, heck, my first foray into therapy was because there was so much gaslighting that I was experiencing in my corporate environment, and it was such a disconnect of how I knew myself to be versus the feedback I was receiving. And, you know, and very candidly, it's also one of the main reasons I became an entrepreneur, because I just said, you know, I'd rather do this on my own and choose who I'm going to interact with and come from a place of love, respect, and equanimity. Because unfortunately, our corporate environments haven't evolved at the pace that allows us all to have a sense of well-being, happiness, and safety. And so for that, you know, I applaud what Robin has done in articulating that book so clearly and succinctly.
Yeah, can I also just add, I don't want to sound like we're sing-songing this white woman's book above all others out there who have done this work for 150, 200 years. For me, it was a peer or somebody that talks like me, looks like me, whatever, talking to me, and I'm like telling me something that I had from a viewpoint that I couldn't hide from her. She found me behind every curtain that I wanted to hide behind. And she pointed me in the direction of educators, activists, teachers, you name it, reverends that have been doing the work for so long, and that I could receive it and hear it from them and pay them for it. And she just was the on-ramp. So I don't want to put her on this, you know, be all end all pedestal. And yet for me, it was the on-ramp, and I don't know when it would have been otherwise. I don't even want to think about that, but does that make sense?
Aurora, this is Hetty.
Mm-hmm.
I can just give me also my perspective. So from the accent, you can probably hear I'm not locally, even though I'm living in the US for 12 years. Mm-hmm. Coming from South Africa, which was very much in the apartheid era. So I was born significantly later after the apartheid era. But it struck me quite profoundly here in the US, for example, that every single form you complete, you have to indicate your ethnicity and your race. Mm-hmm. And that, for instance, was something that was not in South Africa, because you can, for example, never say, oh, that's a Black woman or an Indian woman or a colored woman. It would really, by just echoing, by just saying that, that would be really perceived as racism. So I think one of the things that, as a newcomer to the US, I mean, 12 years is not a long time, it's a bit, it probably is this whole notion of, I don't want to say divide and conquer, but a lot of it also is with like filling in forms where you have to indicate what's your race, what's your ethnicity. So I think it's so important that we speak to these things. For instance, I've had a wonderful colleague at Merck. His name was Conrad, and he and I talked about this topic very often.
Mm-hmm.
He shared with me many, many things in corporate America that happens, that if you are not a Black person, you are not aware that it actually happened. It's these little micro inequities. For example, he said, well, once we hang out two guys, there's no eyebrows raised. But once we hang out three guys, it's kind of like, what are you cooking up now to make an impact or have a negative effect on the company? So I think there's a lot of things like that that's almost institutionalized to say it in that way, which is really, for a person even coming from an apartheid era, it's very in your face here.
Thank you, Hetty. And what I would offer is, yes, we are living in a United States that is anything but united and has not been united for centuries. And a United States that has a very a very complex history that actually, unfortunately, has not been 100% revealed. Right. I grew up in Texas, where, you know, every state in the United States has an educational body that decides what parts of the history books, what part of history is actually pulled through into your history academic. What is that called? Your academic
Like curriculum.
Curriculum, correct. Slavery, the Civil War, Jim Crow. All of those things. I mean, if there was maybe a paragraph in our curriculum, that was a lot. And so, and none of that is by mistake. And it is very much to your point, Hetty, where it is systemic and it is pervasive. And I think that this is why books like this and others, and our own curiosity to really understand the history, and to understand that, you know, we have to fill out forms in 2020 that identify our ethnicity and our race, because that was very much the tool that was used to separate us and to create a hierarchical structure amongst us.
Yeah, hi, this is Norris. Can you all hear me?
Hi, Norris. Welcome.
Hi, no, thanks. Great to be a part of the discussion. If you see me popping in and out, it's because I'm cooking dinner. So, but I'm listening the whole time. Yeah, and I'm friends with Hetty. We're business partners. So we talk about different racial topics often. And I think I want to first just applaud you all for having this incredibly important and courageous conversation. You know, I'm probably older than most of you. You know, worked in corporate America for many years, was in academia for a good number of years before I entered into corporate America. You know, one of my last corporate jobs, I run my own business now, but in one of my last jobs, I was co-lead for diversity and inclusion for a pretty good sized division within a major pharmaceutical company. And just through, you know, I grew up in Detroit where it was all Black, then there was white flight. Then we moved to the suburbs where I was one of very few Blacks. I've lived in predominantly like white and Black America my whole life. And I think what I love about this, there's so much complexity to race. Like I think the one comment maybe Kelly you made about when you realized, boy, how damaged we are as a country racially, and like, wow, do you guys actually celebrate the 4th of July? And I think that's really an important comment because Blacks were not monolithic or anybody of, kind of diverse perspectives. My experience growing up in white and Black America, I developed a resilience and ability to move beyond those different environments, unlike most people. And it's because I've dealt with so much, oh, I see this, I hear that. I have to learn to cope in this kind of context. Most people don't have that opportunity. I have a son at Penn State. He says the Blacks are with the Blacks, the whites are with the whites. And when he tries to bring people together, there's all kinds of uncomfortableness. So this conversation, I won't say any more other than this conversation is what needs to happen so much more because there are so many complexities. We are all in different places to move us to a better place. So just really glad to be a part of the conversation. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for jumping in, Norris. Appreciate your
Thanks,
comments.
Norris. Yeah, there's a teacher that I follow a lot, and I would recommend anybody following her. Her name is Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. And she'll say this is the conversation we're not supposed to be having. Because as we've seen in so many other ways, that it gets messy or people's feelings get hurt, or there's not the sacred space or brave space that's created. Because I'll say, coming from a white person's perspective, and I'm only speaking from my perspective when I do this. So I'm sorry, white people, that I speak on behalf of all white people a lot of times, but it's like, I used to tap dance. And so if I put on a pair of tap shoes now after not tap dancing for 25 years, I could still like tap or do a couple moves. If you're 40 years old and you're putting on tap shoes for the first time, it's going to be awkward. It's going to be hard. You're going to be learning something and muscles that you've just never developed. And that's how I felt, not in the tap dancing realm, but in the realm of even starting to talk about race, because it was like, this is a muscle that may have been in my body, but it has actually never been used. And so I feel terrible at it. And coming from, as we go into question 2, and we can recall becoming aware of your whiteness, perfectionism is such this white supremacist cultural characteristic that we have to do things perfectly. They have to be black and white. They, it's, there's no gray, there's no,
Was there a pun in that?
yeah, exactly.
No pun intended?
No pun intended. But yeah, but I'm always hesitant. Like, I feel like as white people, we need to be able to talk. There's this contradiction in my mind where it's like, we need to be able to talk and practice talking and practice conversing. But sometimes that hurts people of color that are in the room with us because we're so inept, and I can be like a 3-year-old in a 300 level college course. A lot of people of color that I know, they're like PhDs in the conversation of race, and I'm coming in as legitimately barely a preschooler. So that can be a hard conversation for people of color to like stay with too. And I don't want to put the onus on them to do that. And that's my shit. I see your comment, Richard. That's totally my shit though. And working through that. And I'll just also throw out there that white fragility is a traumatized response. White fragility is triggering something in me. So white fragility is just the beginning of going deeper and saying, okay, there's shame there, or there's denial there, or there's perfectionism there. What's behind that? What in my life made me feel like I wasn't good enough unless I was perfect? I'm scared, so I'm just going to deny it. All these different things. And I think for a long time, I didn't think I had trauma in my life. I'm like, oh, I had a great life, like no trauma here. Well, my trauma has been spraying all over everybody. And so white fragility is just the neon sign kind of pointing at not only how do you react in an inflammatory situation like racism and white supremacy, but probably that's how you react in a lot of ways in your life and with your family and with your friends and with your close relationships. So I don't know if I just took us off on a tangent, but thank you, people of color who hang in there while we are learning how to tap dance.
Can I just respond? I think Katie mentioned she was from South Africa and was talking a little bit about apartheid. And it's really interesting because I just came from South Africa right before COVID hit. And what I always thought was really interesting is that the experience that we had in the US was very different from apartheid. And once I really started to talk to the folks in South Africa and Soweto and went to the museum, I realized how similar things actually were. And that especially after like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that there's this kind of idea that in South Africa, everything is great. When in reality, because there's a lack of talking about the systemic racism, Black folks really are suffering over there. And that is something that I think, and from the US, because we all tell and control our narratives, especially like when we're exporting them to other parts of the globe. I just didn't realize. I really felt as if they kind of, I think maybe like she was saying that, you know, Blackness and all those type of things weren't as, they were a big deal, but I just didn't realize the social and economic consequences that they're still kind of experiencing today. So whether it's income that they're not being paid the same, whether it's in colleges that they're not being admitted at the same rates, whether it's that their land, they're not being given back land that was taken from them. So it's interesting for me as a Black woman that there is like white fragility over in South Africa. But because in some of the conversations, not all the conversations, but the conversations that I had with Black folks over there, there's not necessarily the same environment like we're having here right now. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation for them to kind of talk about it openly. And because they're not talking about it openly, they can't respond to it. Does that make sense? So, that was really shocking for me. I thought that the U.S. had it so much worse than other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And when I'm talking to Black folks in Soweto who can't get a job because they're Black versus someone who's colored versus Africana, it showed me just how much we do have in common with Black folks, not just in South Africa, but across the globe.
And Nicole, this is Hetty. I think you touch on quite a few things that's important in terms of the social, the economic, and whatever. But I mean, you find people still today in South Africa, Black people that have never gone to school. And there's never a situation where people would actually try and rectify that. So I think some of the baggage got carried with the country, and especially the older individuals. But I think what is driving the difference, it also depends on in which environment are you having these conversations. Because like Norris mentioned, he and I are business partners, and we talk about it a lot. So in my space, I often talked about it. But I think you have people, I know like in my family, they would never say a word because it's just too uncomfortable for them to go there. So there are people that's very different and have different views, but it is still a challenge today. Just like in the US, racism after how many years after slavery was abandoned still is in place, even though it's not slavery. I mean, there's Jim Crow and other issues that's still in place.
I just wanted to respond to Richard. Richard, I'm sorry, I didn't give enough background from Rev Angel's quote. When I said that Rev Angel said these are conversations we're not supposed to be having, she was talking about by design in our country, stolen land, stolen people, that white people were given the choice of humanity and the balance sheet, basically, and that all the rules were made in those directions, and we chose the balance sheet. So having cross-racial conversation, open-hearted, vulnerable conversation, was not by design to be happening in the US. That's how I was referring to it. So thank you for asking for more clarification.
And am I audible at the moment?
You are.
Oh, that's awesome. So thank you. You know, this Zoom medium is really difficult, and I would really much prefer being in the same room with all of you and having this conversation. So I apologize for any confusion. It's just that this is great, and I appreciate the effort. Thank you very much for everyone exposing himself this way to someone you don't know where I am or who I am or whatever. So thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I also wanted to jump in, Nanette, because I think you were trying to figure out how to raise your hand. And I'd love to invite you. Do you know how to, are you able to unmute yourself? Here we go.
Okay, here we go. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
I did it by accident. I don't know how I did it. I am so not very technical. First off, a pitch for my website, NanetteDMassey.com. I'm in Buffalo, New York, and I do workshops, and entitled "How to Have Effective Conversations About How to Have Effective Conversation, Honest and Effective Conversations About Race." And the first one I did fell really flat, and I couldn't understand why. And then I thought I had made plenty of allowance for what I felt white people were going to need in order to stay in the conversation. And I didn't. Like I said, the conversation just fell really flat. And what I found was that here in Buffalo, we have a really visible community of white activists who are involved in racial healing, but they're involved in everything else too, environment and migrants and everything else. And their identity is very, very married to being activists. They're not really interested in helping anyone. They just want everybody to see them out being active. And that's how they affirm themselves as activists. And they didn't really come to my workshop because they were looking to learn something new or to push themselves forward. They just came because they were looking to be pat on the back and affirmed as good white activists. And I don't do that. So somebody suggested this book to me, White Fragility, and I read the book and I went, oh yeah, you know, I'm flipping each word going, flipping each page going, yeah. White people don't know that. I'm just flipping it going, white people don't know that? They don't know that, you know? And what I do, my experience in these discussion groups is that white folks are still, Robin DiAngelo talks about white centering. And my experience with people discussing this book with white people is that white folks are still way too centered on themselves regarding this book. We only have an hour left, so I got to get right to it, okay? White people are still way too centered on themselves and their growth. I learned this about myself. I learned that about myself, my racism, blah, 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 blah. That's great, but the purpose of learning, all of this stuff is so that one can take a look at how one's behaviors affect other people in the larger society. The people that are being marginalized, the people that are being affected by these behaviors that we're saying we don't want anymore, we don't want to claim anymore. So I always say, you know, you don't go to nursing school so that you can sit around with a bunch of nurses, so that you can graduate, sit around with a bunch of nurses and talk about nursing and how smart you all are about your nursing. You go to nursing school so that you can go to hospitals, doctor's offices, stick people with needles, give them pills, give them advice, answer questions. You go to nursing school so that you can interact with sick people and help them. And the measure of your, the success of your learning is the number of sick people you heal. So the same with this book. The measure of one's growth and awareness of this book is the number of non-white people who are feeling comfortable in your space. So if all you're doing is reading this book and discussing it with other white people, it's just an echo chamber, and it's more white-centeredness. And then white people, and this is the part that gets me, our problems, our hundreds of years of history of problems, become nothing more than a stone for white people to sharpen themselves against. And sharpen themselves and hone their own personality and hone their own being. And that's not why we're here. And that's not why this book was written in and of itself. Like I said, the measure of success with the ideas in this book is how many non-Black people are feeling comfortable in your space, not just how you have grown and what you have seen about yourself. And I'd really like to hear more about experiences that people have had that in their lives with non-white people that were different, that were or are different now as a result of having read this book. That's really what I'd like to hear. I'm done.
Thank you for sharing, Nanette.
Thank you, Nanette.
Now let me figure out how to mute myself again.
So any thoughts, any observations? I will offer something, and others feel free to chime in. You know, I have spent the majority of my professional career, for sure, in white environments. And Nanette, I don't think white people know this. And I think that one of the biggest disappointments that we experience as people of color, or let me just speak to, that I know I experienced, is that I thought, or I granted many white people, I assumed that they understood. And so then there was this part of me that's like, well, either you are so out to lunch or you're actually this malicious, right? And what I realized is that there's, and Norris, you talked about it. Norris talked about it earlier in the commentary. There is a level of self-examination. There is a level of introspection. There's a level of healing, quite frankly, that many of us as people of color have chosen to embark on in order to survive, in order to navigate, and in order to hopefully survive in a more peaceful and well-being manner that white people have not had to do. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations Kelly and other white people, as we've begun to dig deeper. I mean, one of the ones, I'm going to give you a perfect example. I never realized that for the most part, and I know we're making very monolithic and blank statements here, I never realized the difference between the way I walk into a room as a woman of color, and certainly the way I would walk into a room in a corporate environment, that is so different than the way my peer white women would walk into the room. I walk into the room, I scan the room, I look for who's there, and I look for who's missing. And if I see a person of color, I am very consciously making eye contact with that person. And in some way, shape, or form, with my body language, with a head nod, with a wink, I'm letting them know I am here, I see you, and I got you. That is not how the majority of white women walk into a room. I did not know that. I literally learned that in the last maybe 36 months. They walk into a room, they are checking each other out. Kelly used to say, let me finish this thought and then I will come back to something Kelly used to say to me, and I never got it until very recently. They are constantly in a place of comparison with each other. They're constantly whether who's thin enough, who's got the right bag, who's got the right shoes. And I'm not saying that we as women of color and Black women, we don't go there, but it's absolutely not the first thing that's not the first place we go. Not at all. The second thing is that for years, Kelly used to say to me, Aurora, you think that we're not holding the door open for you. And what you're not recognizing, or what you don't know, is that we're actually not holding the door for each other. And I was like, what? So you want to explain that, Kelly? Because that one took me a while.
Yes. You were describing a scenario in corporate America where there was a white woman it was holding the door for the person in front of you was a white woman with more power or whatever in the company. And after the white woman walked in, she immediately went behind her and like left you in the door dust or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I said, you don't understand, that woman wouldn't have held the door for me either. She had her like eyes were set on the most powerful person in the line, and that's where she went. Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, that's all Aurora and I talk about, is a lot of, I don't want to say misunderstanding because it's not that, but we're coming from two totally different places. And the place I'm coming from is, and has been, way more advantaged unfairly than the place that Aurora was coming from. She had her eyes set on competing with the men in the room. That's right, Nanette. She was looking up the ladder. I explain it like it's a ladder, like the white, rich man is at the top, and then, the order goes, and everyone, and white people are looking up, like, I got to get to that house. I got to get to that job. I got to get to that. They're not really looking down the ladder at the people that they're stepping on. We're not.
This is Norris. I just want to add, it exists for all of us, whether you're white, Black, Asian, mixed, is that we all have unconscious bias. We all have implicit biases. And, by having conversations like this, like, one of the things that I think, Nanette, you commented on is, white people may be bearing so much guilt. There's like a myopic focus on that. And it's like, get your eyes off of yourself. Yes, we need to examine our biases, but like you said, it's so we can basically better understand each other, better interact, be more respectful. So I think that's, for me, at the core of it. And when you have conversations like this, where you're crossing these boundaries that we don't normally cross, one is the type of people you're interacting with, and then two, the level of the type of the conversation is happening. How often are those kind of things happening? It's too rare. We all, I think, know that. I did want to say, Nanette, you were commenting about, the example where like a white person had some interaction with a Black person that was really profound. So I'm coming from the opposite side of it. And I had a boss in my one of my last corporate job. He was pretty high level at one point. I was way down his group. Eventually, I became really good friends with him, and he did a lot of things that I liked, like photography, various other types of things I was interested in. He was doing, and so I really became in politics and stuff like that. We aligned on kind of. Liberal, the involvement we had in everything. And I was doing a lot of things that I was getting credit based on what I deserved, but he was also going out of his way to try to give me opportunities. And I realized after a period of time, this relationship was an incredibly complicated and toxic one, that when there was a lot of things in the background for him that I didn't realize, but when I told him, I can't really be friends with you anymore, he unleashed on me things that I would have never expected I would hear. Like, you know what I've done for you, what I've done to make you where you are. I couldn't believe it. It was under the surface, but and he's super liberal, right? But that stuff was there, right? And I don't know how to cut through that, but these kind of conversations, I think, help us all. So again, applauding everyone.
And I think that's exactly it. And I know Nanette, and I mean, I'll wrap it up so that I'd love to hear what you have to share. I have found that white people have spent so little time examining themselves, excavating themselves, learning about themselves. And so, because quite frankly, everything that has been deemed normal has been centered on whiteness. So when the reflection is you have, like, there's a part of me that kind of like, oh, I get it. Since you've been what's been normalized, you've never actually been given an opportunity to look at yourself and be accountable for yourself, to then get to the place where you know yourself well enough that you can then no longer inflict the level of harm and damage that you do on a daily basis in such an unconscious way.
May I interrupt, please?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's not a self-exploration of ourselves. We don't know Black people. No, go out and meet Black people and all the other people you're meeting and hang out with them. Go grill with them if they live in your neighborhood because you're a gentrifier or you might be near someone. It's just knowing Black people because they're Black. Asian people is their way. Treat Black people as real. Hang out with them. And this book, for me, as a white guy who's 58 and grew up with all the white privilege, and I'm well educated, I have all the advantages. So I recognize it. So my obligation is to get in there and do the work. So my self-exploration, this book helps open it up, but it could become an echo chamber. So that's what I share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
I think that was Richard. Nanette, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, I asked a question of the white folks in this group, and I'm really looking for a response. I want to know what you learned, what you saw in this book, what you saw of yourself in this book, and how it makes your relationships with non-white, some examples of how it's made your relationships with non-white people different. Any takers?
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, so I kind of thought I didn't see colors, so therefore I wasn't a racist. I kind of grew up in a small town and had very humble beginnings. And so I have had people of color among my friends my whole life. And to the point, Richard, like, I have people of color who are my friends, but I never asked them. And I'm now more cognizant of asking people their opinions and their and questioning my thinking, which, despite the fact that I've been around people of color my whole life, I never did, because I just assumed that everyone thought the same way that I did. And because I didn't see someone's skin color as being different than mine, I thought that they came into the situation the same way, with the same background and the same psyche that I did. And so for me, and I've had unconscious bias training, and I thought it was absolutely amazing, Norris. I thought it was one of the best trainings that I've ever done. But this book caused me to really reflect and think about just asking people questions that I've never possibly, I didn't even realize I had to ask. Like to Kelly's point earlier, like just because my world was my world, I just thought it was everybody's world. And so I didn't realize before reading the book that, I needed to ask people questions. And it was okay to ask people questions. And people were more forgiving and apologetic and would rather answer my question than me make an assumption that was not founded.
That was brilliant, Tracy. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, to answer your question, Annette, I had two girlfriends, Black girlfriends growing up at different parts of my life. And after I started doing this work and the matrix shifted for me, it was like I went back to those relationships in a different way, where I was showing up just a more authentic, better person. I realized how shallow I was in a lot of relationships in a lot of ways. And so, to be honest, doing this work has made my relationships deeper with all people, but two Black girlfriends separately and individually, just a much deeper connection.
I'll share something. I'm just popping into this, and I apologize for jumping in late, but I was in another session. So I'm gay, and I remember the whole process of coming out. And now what I try to do is I let anybody ask me a question, like anything you want to know, like anything. And I have found that when I can have conversations and ask those hard questions, like Tracy was just saying, coming from my place of understanding my whiteness and my white privilege, and just the multitudes of things and traumas that I've never experienced, is so helpful. But I don't want someone else to feel like it's their responsibility to educate me on my role. Does that make sense? Like, they shouldn't have to educate me on the whole Black experience. I should take some of that on myself.
I hear what you're saying there. Tell me your name.
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm the executive director of Venture Café in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Oh, hi, Karen. I have been talking to a lot of Surge people lately. Are you all familiar with Surge, Standing Up for Racial Justice? It's a nationwide all-white organization that that is founded on white people don't need to wait for non-white people to train them and tell them. White people can get together themselves and educate themselves. And what I'm finding, though, it's a great idea in theory. What I'm finding, though, is that, like I said, a lot of the activist community here in Buffalo, it's a group full of white racial SWJs, social justice warriors. You put two Black people in that room and they don't know what to talk about now, because all they've been talking about is themselves in relation to non-white people.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I think it's a great idea that to push the idea that white people don't want to belabor non-white people with their learning. But then what happens is, like I said earlier, white people end up in this echo chamber and they stay there. And they think they're really doing some learning, but they're really not. It's just another therapy session relative to race. And the purpose of this book and this material and all of this kind of stuff is ultimately so that white people can examine themselves and go out into the world. Like, I'm not sure if you're Aurora or Kelly, because you both say Aurora and Kelly. Are you Aurora?
I'm Aurora.
Okay, like Aurora was saying, and not only do less harm, but to actually be helpful. To actually be helpful. because you know, I'm one of those new age hippie dippy people. And
My favorite.
And I believe very firmly and very literally that we are all one. So, you know, if I don't like my finger and I cut it off, the rest of my body is going to feel it. And what white people need to understand is, don't come over here to help us. Racism hurts you too.
Absolutely.
That black kid that got shot by the police and got let off, that was an American citizen who was denied due process, which is promised to us in all of our laws. And if they could do it to him, the day will come when your life doesn't have enough value to the powers that be that they can justify doing it to you too.
Yeah.
And that is why you need to get in this, not to come over here and help us.
Absolutely. That's probably been the, so I have sort of that problem solver mentality, you know, like my wife will tell you that she's taught me to become a much better listener and supporter, because I had that tendency to just want to fix problems. But that has been the biggest shift in my mindset in the past probably 5 years since I've been exploring this, is to support others' work, not solve the problems, right? And once I learned that, like, it made a huge difference. I'm not saying I've got it all figured out by any stretch of the imagination, but it did, just that helped so much.
And that's what black people need. That's what non-white people need from white people more than anything else, is to just listen to us. Non-white people come in with all of their learning and all of their therapizing relative to marginalized people. And then they come in with an answer and they want to help. And what we need more than anything else is just to be listened to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there are, you know, like white people will get together and say, oh, well, we need to start a program and we need to this and that. We need to get this legislation passed. And they've got this, you know, 1.5 year plan going on. Shaquina just needs bus fare so she can get to her job. How can you make that happen?
Yeah.
You know, and if you sit and listen to Shaquina, that's what Shaquina will tell you. Shaquina doesn't want to hear about the socio-political implications of the social strata. She just needs bus fare to get, and you know, the system is why she doesn't have bus fare. And yes, the system ultimately is what will help her with bus fare so she can get to work and do something for herself today.
Hey, Nanette,
that's empowering people.
Maybe this is a much longer conversation we can have offline. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I'm fascinated by it though. One of the things that my community down here struggles with is there's just an almost complete lack of trust in our community to have those conversations without, in a safe and respectful way, right? And that's one of the things I'm starting to grapple with as the ED of Venture Cafe down here, right? Is we want innovation and entrepreneurship to be open to everybody. Everybody's got good ideas. It's a great way to create generational wealth and attack some of these poverty and economic mobility issues. What advice can you give or insight can you share about where can we start to build the trust, to create the change, to have the conversation?
I would say, like I said before, just listen. Like I said, white people come in with their ideas and what they want to do and how they want to help. And an example I always use is I bought a vacuum cleaner recently. I went to Target, Walmart, whatever. I bought a vacuum cleaner. And I bought like the second least expensive vacuum cleaner. That vacuum cleaner has no power. It doesn't pick up anything on my carpet. And right now I have a brand spanking new carpet, a vacuum cleaner sitting in my dining room. And my carpet looks like frat boys live here. So if I went to a carpet store, if I went to a vacuum cleaner store and I told the salesperson, yeah, I need to buy a new vacuum cleaner, the guy is saying to me, oh, this one over here, it's the least expensive. It fits your budget, yada, 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 yada. He's not speaking to what I need.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really thinking he's going to town too. And then I walk out of that store and he's just like, what just happened? You know, a lot of times, like I said, white folks have these big ideas and these grand plans, and all Shakina wants to know in order to be involved is, how can I feed my kid? How can I help my kid do better in school? How can I consistently have bus fare to work? Because you help her with those things, then she sees that she can trust you and that you really do have the bettering of her life as center focus. And that's what she will tell other non-white people about you, and it'll get around.
So more one-on-one?
Not so much one-on-one, but just really listen and don't come in with an idea of we need to do this. You know, if you're talking to, if you talk to 15 different people and you hear all 15 of them saying, you know, we're having a problem getting to work, maybe the issue is, you know what, we need to get with the, what we really need to do to help non-white people in our community is we need to get with the public transit system and help them, you know, better plan their routes better, because these jobs way out in the suburbs that actually pay well, these non-white people can't get to them, you know?
So I have a couple of thoughts. My name is Rochelle, by the way. The first is, I think, and I didn't read the book, so my sense is that we may be confounding race and socioeconomic class, which are two different things. And we tend to generalize the two because more often than not, when we talk about this, we're really focusing on marginalized communities, et cetera. But to the question about where do we have authentic conversations, I know when Venture Cafe was in person, in real time person, when we get together every week, we had talked about having a poverty simulation exercise.
Oh yeah, we do that down here too.
That's a great, I think it's a great way to level set and really have authentic conversations about where the need is and how to systemically address some of the challenges that people are facing. I had made the recommendation earlier that, you know, Despite Good Intentions is also a really good book because it talks about this, you know, savior mentality where people want to put that that cape on and presume that the recommendations and the prescriptions that they have are the adage or the right fit for, you know, whatever the challenge may be. But listening is oftentimes the best prescription, is the best remedy to move forward in a way that's holistic. So I'm glad to hear that people are using it. But I think it's a really great tool to have those conversations and to get people aware of their ignorance. Or so.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
So we have 5 minutes left for our time together, and this has been
beautiful. You know,
beautiful.
Norris, one other additional thing is building on the last comment. I don't know that model that happens Venture Cafe.
We lost you, Norris.
He'll be back soon. He's competing with his family on the wireless because we meet often, and that's the case. He'll be back.
So, Richard, I heard you. I saw your mic go off. I don't know while Norris gets back. If there
I'm
was anything
really
you wanted to
sorry.
share.
I'm really sorry to intervene too much, but I couldn't figure out the name of the prior speaker. I think the comments I just heard from that person just moved me so much. And I would like to know who that was, if someone could add it to the chat, because those were so real. Thank you.
Oh, Rochelle Martinez. I'm with the Science Center in Philadelphia.
All right. Love Philly. I have a lot of family there. I went to college there. I love it. I love you all. I'm in upstate New York. I know some other people. Yeah. Love you all. Thank you. Those are beautiful words.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes. And Richard, you also had mentioned Kendi's book. I don't know if you are able to maybe drop that in the link for folks.
It's in.
Okay,
I'm
great.
not-
Thank you.
I'm sure, you must know it, the two of you,
Oh, yeah.
racist, because I'm a little impaired. Usually I'm on my tablet or my PC or whatever. And I'm on my phone right now. I'm in transit, believe it or not.
No
Yeah,
worries.
Jen
We've
put the
dropped it.
link in the
So
chat.
thank you. Yeah, I would say, the anti-racist book, the first one. The other one takes a lot more work.
He just came out
Yeah,
with, did you see the graphic, like the more graphic YA version of Stand from the Beginning? They did with,
Oh my God, that's a great idea too. Yeah,
it's
they're saying-
amazing.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
So,
Norris, are you back? Norris is back, Aurora.
okay, great. Norris,
Can you hear me?
we can.
Okay. Yeah, no, just to finish that point, depending on like who you're having that conversation with amongst that kind of that broad, wide-ranging Black strata, that conversation could go when you're really being vulnerable, like say as a white person, and you're saying, which is good, right? You're trying to be in a place of, hey, I'm just trying to understand, just trying to have a conversation. I'm ready to hear what you have to tell me. And you say something to a person who's maybe, kind of grew up in the hood, not around a lot of white people. They feel like a lot of questions are stupid and they're going to jump on you. And then there's other people who they're like, I'm so glad you asked that. I think, let's talk about it. And it's, I don't know how to cut through all of it, but I think, by doing things like this, having these conversations, it's recognizing there ain't no one straight path. It's complicated, but we grow in our understanding when we have conversations like this. We start recognizing things cut so many different ways. It's complicated within the Black community, even us to connect with some people who don't have the same experience. So we all have work to do. How do Black people need to work to better connect with white people, to be less attacking, be more, hey, let's engage, let's have a conversation, let's break down the barriers. So we shouldn't make it like white people should understand. It's not like you have all the work to do. It should be a meeting somewhere in the middle. Yes, there is a lot that needs to be done to try to make sure we're not marginalizing further, communities like Black community and other, folks of color. But we all have work to do.
Well, and I think that connects to the conversation that I think Kelly and I have all the time, which is, our liberation is linked. Many times it's much easier to see how my liberation is linked to white people, but I believe that white people's liberation is linked to all of us of color. And I think that's where the mutuality of healing, the mutuality of being in community and being able to share space and listen to one another and to see one another. Because I think you couldn't have said it more beautifully, Nanette. Our overall vision is that all is one. So that there's actually really only one of us here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a tremendous opportunity. And I think this is part of what we want to continue to model for others in a way that at times is messy, at times is doesn't always feel good. But if we can be consistent in our intention of coming from a place of love and coming from a place of no shame, then all of us have an opportunity to heal and come together.
And I think the beauty of this, one of the beauties of this book at the very least is, I can't remember who said it, but we were talking about really listening to people in a different way, understanding that, people have different experiences and different cultures, and they're hearing things in a different way, as opposed to I think it was you, Aurora, as opposed to there being a universal experience. Mm-hmm. And what this book does at the very least is, like I said, instead of just helping white people become more introspective about themselves, it can help you to be introspective about how you listen so that you can go into non-white spaces with a more open listening ear. You can say, oh my goodness, you know, when she says that, I normally think blah, 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 but I've read this book. Let me see what else I can hear out of what she's saying. That is at the very least, how to make this book useful.
Agreed.
So any additional thoughts, comments, questions, ways in which you're hoping to show up differently as a consequence of the book, as a consequence to listening to the podcast, as a consequence of what you learned today? And, you know, I think I'm going to actually connect it to what I think we're all living right now with COVID. I think it's a macrocosm of this micro level conversation that we're having at this moment in time. The fact that we're all connected, we're all impacted, and how can we share and live on this planet in a much more, you know, cohesive and respectful and honest way with each other. Any additional thoughts, parting questions?
I'm going to read the book. Yeah, it sounds very powerful. So I'd heard of it, but certainly from the commentary we're all offering, it's a must read. And you know, I have 3 children, a daughter who's 23, a son who's 21, and then a son who's 17. So, you know, and the one lady who's gay, my 17-year-old is gay. He came out to, so there's just so many different things that I think in terms of differences that for us, with him just coming out to us and us having no idea, for us, that was like a transformation of how we think about differences differently. So I look forward to reading the book and hopefully delving deeper into how I can better engage and help support how we all come together better.
Aurora, it's Hetty.
Yes.
My philosophy in life, and sometimes to my detriment, is it's all starts with us. It's first looking at yourself, making the changes, the inquiry, by starting at your own level before you actually expect anybody else to start. We often have the expectation that, oh, somebody else must move forward first. But it's actually about us, starting with us, and as individuals, we need to move forward first.
Yes, and, you know, thank you, Hetty. Couldn't agree more. And, you know, one of the other invitations that we'll make is that if there is any resources, I know several of you have shared books, links, again, to continue this conversation. You know, I forget, and I'm not going to attribute this quote correctly, but it's very hard to dislike or hate up close. And we got to get closer to each other. We got to get closer.
Yeah, I really miss being in physical presence with all of you. So thank you for creating as much intimacy as possible via screens during this time. And thank you, Jen, for facilitating so beautifully.
Yes. And I think Richard called us to this action earlier, which is go out and touch. Well, we can't do this now, but go out and reach, join webinars, join conversations. And I think, Nanette, you host a Sunday conversation. Oh, let's unmute you real quick. Oh, boo, we can't hear you.
Now, okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I normally do workshops, and you know, since we can't do that now, I'm learning to do the whole chat thing, and I do a chat on Sundays that I call White Fragility, moving beyond the white echo chamber. You can find it on Facebook. You can find it on Eventbrite. You have to sign up through Eventbrite, and you can go to my website at nanetdemassey.com, And I'm very focused on actions and moving forward and taking this information from this book and seeing what you can do with it to help not just sharpen yourself, but to be of use in the larger world and in the bigger picture.
To be of service.
Yes.
Thank you, Nanette. So with that, we'd love if you would join us. You know, we find that these conversations are important, that we not only ground them as when we begin, but we ground them as we now go off into our homes, our families, our sleep. And so we'd like to invite you to take the 3 deepest breaths that you've taken this evening.
There we go.
And we'll take you through a Hawaiian practice. It's called Ho'oponopono. And we'll leave you with this as we bid our farewells, and thank you all so very much for being with us this evening.
I am sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Thank you, everyone.